All right. Gaza War Day 227. The news today is all about the announcement by the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Karim Khan, stating that they are going to apply for arrest warrants for, in order, Yahya Sinwar, Ismail Haniyeh, and Mohammed Daif of the Palestinian resistance, and also, by the way, Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. Reactions to this, some thoughts about this, and some what we can say about this. What I think there's a lot of different thoughts and a lot of different threads to follow about this, and I finally have some conclusions in terms of where I have landed on it. But first, let me talk a bit about the fallout from the helicopter crash yesterday. I reported on it as a hard landing, but it was a crash. Everybody aboard the helicopter died, including the president and the foreign minister, whose statements and actions we've been following for the past half year and more in light of the war in Gaza. And people mention that President Raisi is in many ways the architect of the strategy, Iran's strategy of diplomacy with the global South and joining BRICS and reaching out to Venezuela in the way that they did. I mentioned yesterday that it's a system that Iran has a system. It has a really deep, its commitments are really deep, and its personnel that are available for doing these things is also really deep. They have plenty of very competent people that can step up, including apparently the vice president who's the interim president, and they're going to organize elections. So, but nonetheless, this is a big loss. It's a symbolic loss, and people will be mourning and grieving, and they are all the way across the axis of resistance, and of course in Iran. What was it? An accident? Some people, I think, a lot of the pro-Iran or Iranian accounts that I follow think it was. Others think it was not, and probably that Iran would say that it was an accident, even if it was not. So I don't know if you guys watch, but I recommend Dimitri Lascaris. And Dimitri Lascaris has a channel, and he did a reaction with Laith Marouf of Free Palestine TV, and they went through a number of things. I'm not going to repeat everything they said, but one of the things Laith Marouf said was, even if it was an assassination, which he thinks that it was, Iran wouldn't admit it because, first of all, for the loss of, face or whatever, and also because that then kind of commits them to overt war, World War III kind of scenario. So better to chalk it up to an accident, even if it's the case. So the pieces of evidence that were presented, or circumstantial evidence, reasons to suspect foul play. There were apparently 3 helicopters that took off, and 2 of them got back fine despite the weather, and only the president and foreign minister's helicopter crashed. They were visiting a dam with Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is an ally of Israel's and the United States, and so it was they would have had the distance, the ability, the proximity to pull off some kind of sabotage operation if that was the way that they wanted to go. Now, if it was an assassination and Iran discovers it, this was one of the questions that Dimitri posed in the interview. And the thing is that it's not going to change Iran's overall strategy. I've talked about strategic patience on this channel before, and strategic patience means they have a goal that they're working towards, and they're working towards it with all their might. They're doing everything that they can, and they're not going to be diverted from it. And I think I've quoted before Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, the Lebanese resistance group, which is very close to Iran. And people say that he's the overall spokesperson for the entire axis of resistance. And Nasrallah, when Soleimani was assassinated, when General Qasem Soleimani was assassinated a couple of years ago by Trump, he said, what do you, people are asking us what we're going to do. What do you think we're going to do? We're going to assassinate one of your heroes for one of our heroes? You don't have any heroes. He said, Soleimani's shoe is worth more than all the American politicians combined. What are we going to assassinate SpongeBob SquarePants or something? Like, I don't remember who he referred to it. He was mocking the fact that there are no leaders of the stature or integrity, in their view, in the West. So and we'll talk about Biden. We'll be talking about Biden a little bit today as well, tonight. So that still applies. That doesn't change. The president and foreign minister were assassinated, the same as a general earlier that sparked the missile launch of April 14th, about more than a month ago now, and the assassination of Soleimani a couple of years ago. So there are these things that happen, these major Iranian figures that are assassinated, but in their view, that doesn't cause them to deviate from the course that they're on. So that's just, that there's a fatalism there that I think you could wish was not quite so much, that they might not present such opportunities for assassination or accident, but nonetheless, it's there. It's part of their makeup. It's part of how they do things, and it's not unlike others in the global South. So you may remember. I don't know if you remember, but some time ago, a Turkish lone gunman assassinated an important Russian figure, I think an ambassador, right out in public. And people were wondering whether Russia was going to retaliate against Turkey, and Russia didn't retaliate against Turkey. And this is also, it's not just the patience in terms of being able to handle assassinations without being provoked into retaliation, or without doing a tit for tat assassination campaign, because assassination is really a US Israeli favorite thing to do. They assassinate as the first and middle and last resort. That's all they ever think of doing, is assassinating people, assassinating every leader. They do it domestically, right? All the black leaders of prominence in the US are assassinated, right? Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, all the Black Panthers, they're assassinated. They assassinate foreign leaders. They assassinate, they tried to assassinate Fidel Castro in Cuba many, 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 many times. They assassinated Patrice Lumumba. They tried to assassinate the Syrian leader. So it just goes on and on. So assassination is their thing. It's not really the resistance thing, and it's not really how Russia does. I mean, Russia certainly is accused of plenty of assassinations, but I don't know. I'm not gonna compare. I'm not gonna put Russia into this. Let's leave Russia out. This is not a Russia channel, but like the resistance, the Palestinians rarely do assassinations of Israeli figures. Hezbollah rarely goes after prominent Israeli politicians. Iran doesn't go after prominent Israeli leaders. They focus on the destruction of the military capacity of Israel, and this long-term strategy of evicting the US and the Israelis and the Western imperialists from the region. So that's not going to change. after this, whether this was an assassination or not. Maybe it was an accident. Helicopters are dangerous vehicles to fly in. Um, you know, if you consider that they went there in a helicopter because the roads are not great, you consider that it's very mountainous terrain, and that again is why it's hard to get in and out of there, and that weather happens, and helicopters have a hard time in that kind of weather. And then when the helicopter goes down, it's not easy to get there to rescue because for the same reason as it's not easy to as you needed the helicopter in the first place. So it's possible that it was an accident for sure. And in all cases, you wouldn't there's no reason to expect a change in policy or how things are going to go in Iran after this. So um let's talk about a little bit about the International Criminal Court issuing applications for warrants. There the way my mind works, it's kind of um random associations almost, but the the application for warrants that was made by Karim Khan and the International Criminal Court. Let me just look it up here. Um, it, it presents a theory. It presents a theory as if history started on October 7th. And that kind of reminded me of the way that, and I wrote about it in my book about Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. It reminded me of the way that the predecessor of the International Criminal Court, the International Criminal Tribunal on Rwanda, the ICTR, the way that it started history on April, I think it was April the 6th, like after the Rwandan president Habyarimana and the Burundi president were assassinated, after their plane was shot out of the sky and they were killed. It's after that that the investigation began in the International Criminal Tribunal in Rwanda, which is a bit of a bias built in there, because if it was in fact Paul Kagame's Rwandan Patriotic Front that shot the plane down, and therefore carries a responsibility for everything that happened after. And similarly, by starting the clock, so in the International Criminal Tribunal on Rwanda, they started the clock after the plane crash, meaning they didn't investigate who's responsible for the plane crash. And Karim Khan and the International Criminal Court are starting the clock on October 7th, which means they don't investigate the siege, the apartheid, the settlements in the West Bank, the wall, the mowing the lawn operations of 2021 and 2014 and 08-09 and 2012 and to 2006. The camps, the prisoners, the torture of prisoners, the sexual violence against Palestinian prisoners. None of that is in this statement, because history starts for Karim Khan on October 7th. So they cook that situation that way. The other thing is that, the plane crash, and Karim Khan is issuing this statement on the same day as the world is reeling from this news of the helicopter crash of the president of Iran. So what is Karim Khan doing? And what he's doing here is he's putting out warrants for the arrest of Mohammed Daif, Yahya Sinwar, Ismail Haniyeh. And then there's a whole thing of all the things that Israel has accused the Palestinian resistance of doing on October 7th. All of the entire atrocity propaganda machine that Israel set in motion, all the debunked claims that have been pretty well discredited, all of which source back to the Israeli army. And this is all stated as a fact and as the reason why these three men are wanted. And then follows it up with reasonable grounds to believe that Netanyahu and Gallant bear criminal responsibility for the following war crimes and crimes against humanity: starvation, willful killing, intentional direction of attacks against civilian population, extermination, persecution, other inhumane acts. So the siege, etc. So what's this mean? And what's going to happen? So I want to analyze, because there's several facts. I'm not a legal authority. I'm not a lawyer. I don't even really believe that um, elites take the law all that seriously. They don't. It's a tool for them. I don't. I don't begrudge people who geek out on these legal questions, but for me, it's a matter of the facts on the ground and, of course, the military situation. So there's always a limit to how much I'm willing to engage in these legal analyses, but the political and factual statements that Karim Khan makes towards the end, after he gets into these charges, are very interesting, because he says he wants to emphasize the principle of complementarity. The principle of complementarity means we don't need to prosecute Israel if Israel prosecutes itself. But he says it requires a deferral to national authorities only when they engage in independent and impartial judicial processes that do not shield suspects and are not a sham. Meow, Karim Khan. So requires thorough investigations at all levels, addressing the policies and actions underlying those applications. So he basically said in the third last paragraph that he doesn't believe that Israel is capable of investigating itself, which is not what what the official position of America, Germany, France, Canada, the UK, etc. is. The official position of the entire West is whatever Israel says is the truth. So if Israel says they're not violating human rights, and Biden said that after, we'll get to that. So this is the International Criminal Court, which is an instrument of the West, directly contradicting this fairly fundamental point of how Israel is supposed to be treated by the West. So they're saying, and he used the word, it has to not be a sham. And then the next paragraph, I think, is very, very honest. He says, if we don't demonstrate our willingness to apply the law equally, if it is seen as being applied selectively. So he's not worried about it being applied selectively. He's worried about it being seen as being applied selectively, which it is. We will be creating the conditions for its collapse. And this is done. So the law is applied selectively. It is not applied to Israel. It has not been applied to Israel. And you have not demonstrated, even in this statement, your willingness to apply the law equally. So you have created the conditions for its collapse. And that is the ultimate import of this whole thing that they've done here. But let's go on. In doing so, we will be loosening the remaining bonds that hold us together. Those are not holding us together. We are not being held. We are not held together anymore. We don't. And then he goes, the stabilizing connections between all communities and individuals, the safety net to which all victims look in times of suffering. Yes, I'm sure the victims in Gaza are looking to the International Criminal Court as its safety net here in the times of suffering. But he goes on, he says, this is the true risk we face in this moment. So the true risk we face in this moment is that if the law is seen as being applied selectively, we'll be creating the conditions for its collapse. And this is it. This is the story of this application for warrants. I think this is all here in the second last paragraph. Then, he concludes, he says, now more than ever, we must collectively demonstrate that international human law, the foundational baseline for human conduct during conflict, applies to all individuals and applies equally across the situations addressed by my office and the court. That's how we'll prove tangibly that the lives of all human beings have equal value. That's just so far from what he actually believes and is doing that it's almost nauseating to contemplate. But it is to be seen to be doing this that they have basically gone in for what I guess I'm coming to the conclusion is some kind of controlled demolition of this institution, the International Criminal Court, which, I mean, good riddance. I wrote an article years ago called Don't Expect Justice from the Imperial Criminal Court. And I still don't. But this is a dramatic event, nevertheless. So, okay, what are the facts in terms of what happens as a result of the arrest warrants on Hamas? Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Daif are underground military commanders of an army for which every person in this military organization, as well as every civilian in Palestine, is under constant danger of imminent assassination and murder. So Israel wants to kill Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Daif and Ismail Haniyeh. And they have been trying. In fact, you could argue everything they've done in the past 8 months has been to try to kill Mohammed Daif and Yahya Sinwar. And they killed Ismail Haniyeh's whole family. So these, especially Sinwar and Daif, they're living underground, commanding an army that is fighting the entire West's entire military machine. These arrest warrants are not going to have a lot of effect on their day-to-day life. Ismail Haniyeh is another story because Ismail Haniyeh is the political leadership, one of the political leadership, and the task of the Ismail Haniyehs of the world is to operate openly and try to conduct diplomacy, including guiding negotiations with ultimately Israel and peace negotiations and negotiations with the United States, armistices, whatever it is, they have to negotiate. So by putting an arrest warrant on Haniyeh, what you're basically doing is you're trying to delegitimize Hamas. You're trying to make it's another form of Western rejectionism towards Hamas, the same as the stories, the atrocity propaganda. You're basically saying Hamas cannot be dealt with. We can't speak to Hamas. It's illegitimate to deal with Hamas. That's what this is, but we have to condemn Hamas. That's what the arrest warrant towards Haniyeh amounts to. So now if Qatar is hosting Haniyeh, if Haniyeh travels in the Arab world, there's always this problem. Like, are you abetting someone who's fleeing justice? I saw, people that I respect, they said, I wouldn't be surprised if Haniyeh hands himself over to this court. I would be surprised if Haniyeh hands himself over to this court. This court is not a legitimate court. This court is a kangaroo court, and it would be preposterous for a resistance person to hand themselves over to the jurisdiction of this court. That's where I've landed. I thought about it all day, but that's where I've landed. Um, now, you probably have heard that Hamas had made statements prior to this saying, we'd welcome a proper investigation of October 7th. We're willing to submit ourselves to international courts, in terms of how these wars were conducted, if Israel's willing to do the same. And Israel has basically thought that was treated that like with contempt, and so has the U.S. And but after this statement by Karim Khan, there were a succession of statements from the different resistance groups, and they all said a couple of things. First of all, they said this application basically equates the victims and the killers. So they rejected the legitimacy of the court, basically saying we're seeking Sinwar and Daif and Haniyeh alongside Gallant and Netanyahu. So that's one thing. Almost all of them said that, whether it was Hamas or Islamic Jihad, the PFLP, they all said this kind of thing. And then, and the other thing they said was, why just, so first of all, you can't equate these. And second of all, why just Gallant and Netanyahu? It's the whole chain of command. Everybody that committed these crimes, everybody in the military leadership, everybody in the civilian leadership. If anything, the South Africans did a much more comprehensive job, right? Where they presented all the statements or some of the statements of intent to commit genocide by the Israelis. So that was the flavor of the statements by the resistance, to say we don't understand. One of them said we're baffled or something. We're astonished that the court would do this. So that's one side. And then on the other side, you have statements by the American officials, including the Biden spokesman and Biden himself. And they all said, well, first of all, Biden said it's not genocide. We reject that. We'll always support Israel no matter what. Miller said the court doesn't have jurisdiction, which whatever legally apparently is not true. But he said Hamas has to be held accountable by being killed. So that's what he thinks of international law. And then statements by other US officials, like AIPAC funded US politicians, AIPAC being the pro-Israel lobby that gives money to all these American politicians. Most American politicians get a whole bunch of money from the pro-Israel lobby. So the various AIPAC funded politicians, they said stuff like really dramatic stuff. I don't know. I think the word people like to use is unhinged. So the unhinged statements, like they would say things like, we don't recognize, one politician said something like, we don't recognize the jurisdiction of the court, but the court sure is going to recognize what we do to the court, when they threaten our allies and stuff. They threatened Karim Khan's family. So all of that. So I actually think that and then Israelis have said this is a disaster, and we're not going to recognize it and we don't care and whatever. So that was to be expected. The American reaction is a little bit more energetic than I probably anticipated. But what I would say, a couple of things. When you look at both sides and their reactions to this, because nobody's happy, which does not mean that Karim Khan did a good job whatsoever. But by bundling by bundling it, by putting it in an omnibus bill, by putting it as a package deal, by saying, okay, here are your options. You can either accept, if you're somebody who's anti-genocide here, you have to accept all the false claims by Israel about Hamas and the prosecution of the resistance leaders and their delegitimization, which is a big part of what Israel has been trying to do, right? Israel is always trying to delegitimize whoever Palestinian leaders are, and there happen to be Hamas right now. But whoever it was, the Israelis would be saying they cannot be dealt with. They're terrorists, rapists, baby killers, whatever it is they want to make up about them, they'll make up in order to. And now they're convicted or they're under arrest by the court. So they package that and they say, well, if you want any accountability for Israeli leaders for doing this actual genocide out in the open, you have to accept these same leaders' false claims about the resistance, which they've used to justify the genocide. So Karim Khan has packaged this together so that you either have to reject both. You have to reject the possibility that Israel might be held accountable legally if you want to reject the Israel's persecution, the internationalization and transfer to an international court of Israel's prosecution of Palestinian leadership. That's a package. If you want to reject that, you have to reject it all. And if you want to accept it, if you want to accept the possibility that at some future date, maybe there will be some consequences for Israeli leaders, then you have to accept also that, like I said, the Israel-driven persecution of and the lies that Israel has told about Hamas on October 7th. So given this choice, it's pretty clear that America and Israel are gonna say, throw it out. We don't want either. We don't want either one. We can go and kill Hamas ourselves. We don't need a court to go and declare Hamas illegal. We are murderers. We are murdering everybody in Gaza. Eventually, if we keep this up, surely we're going to kill Mohammed Daif and Yahya Sinwar. We assassinate Palestinians all over the world. At some point, we'll get around to Ismail Haniyeh. That's the American and Israeli mentality. They don't need the court. So from their perspective, the warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant are outrageous. They're appalling. They are a statement directly in contravention of that most important principle that I mentioned maybe a couple months ago now on this sit rep, which is that Israelis are super racially superior, godlike figures that can do whatever the hell they want and kill whoever they want. And that principle is what's been challenged by Karim Khan, who said you can't have that principle and be seen to be applying the law equally. And if you're not seen to be applying the law equally, then the law collapses, which has already happened. They've collapsed the ICJ. They've collapsed the ICC now. They've collapsed the UN Security Council. They declared it an optional. What do they call it? They called it I didn't call it optional. I can't even remember the word they used. But after the Security Council ordered a halt to the fighting, the Americans said, "Oh yeah, the non-binding." They said, "Yes, we abstained from voting on this non-binding resolution." So what's going to happen now is that the Americans and the Israelis are going to, if these arrest warrants are issued, they're going to Germany and France, and they're going to have to leave the International Criminal Court. They're going to leave it in tatters because they're not going to enforce arrest warrants on Israel. There's the sacred Israelis. They're not going to do that. So they're either going to have to remember I said before that by ruling against Nicaragua, when Nicaragua tried to bring Germany to the Court of Justice to get them to stop supporting Israel, the Court of Justice said, no, we're not ordering provisional measures against Germany, which was important. And that kind of, to me, told me there was a lot of orchestration going on behind the scenes because Germany needs to be seen as following international law. Israel doesn't. Israel likes to be seen as not following international law. But once you put arrest warrants for Israelis in a court that Germany supposedly has signed on to, then Germany has to either leave that court or arrest Israelis if they come fly to Europe, which is they're not going to do. There's no way. So they've put their court into a bind, and they've put their court on the road to self-destruction because they already had discredited themselves. Let's just remember that even if they hadn't baked all the lies of October 7th into their arrest warrant statement today, application statement today, they waited 8 months to apply for arrest warrants for two figures in Israeli politics when the evidence of genocide up and down and across Israeli society is as glaring as day to everybody that's been watching this across the whole world. So the court has been discredited by its inaction for the past 8 months already. Then they cooked up this statement that completed the discrediting, and by issuing these applications for arrest warrants, they've enraged the very Western powers that have been using this court for the past, during its existence. I don't know, for the past, since the Rwanda and Yugoslavia tribunals were wound up and the ICC was created as its successor to try Africans and more recently Putin or whatever. So in my article, Don't Expect Justice from the Imperial Criminal Court, I pointed out that the up until that point, up until they did the Ukraine-Russia thing, prosecuting only Russians, not Ukrainians, but up until they did that, the ICC had only ever tried Africans. So it was really just a court for Westerners to try Africans for crimes. So the other thing that this ICC decision does, because they're going to apply, because they've applied to get Haniyeh in particular, arrest warrants for Haniyeh and the Hamas officials, basically. They have made life complicated for countries like China and the other countries around China that have this stated goal of rescuing the United Nations Charter from the hegemony and the impunity of the US and Western power. So their whole thing is like, let's uphold international law. Let's actually have a system based on international law. And the existing International Criminal Court has just said, Chinese are trying to uphold like international law and diplomacy. So they want to use international law, but they also want diplomacy. And these two things are in contradiction often. You can't have a diplomatic solution while you're trying to get the leaders of the war in jail, right? So it's often the case that the criminal justice process, the international criminal justice process, ruins the diplomatic process. And that's also happening here. So by saying, if China is trying to say, we want to get a state of Palestine, we want to help Hamas and Fatah resolve their differences. China, Russia, they both have this, right? China, Russia, Iran, they all have this. Let's get a organization of all of the political factions. Let's get them together so that they can have elections and have a state and have a government and start governing and kind of create these facts of a Palestinian state with international recognition, so that becomes a kind of basis for a solution, rather than having to do it through war and through the battlefield. And if you're trying to do it diplomatically, and the International Criminal Court has said, well, actually, anywhere these people go, if you're a signatory to the International Criminal Court statute, the Rome Statute or whatever, you have to arrest Ismail Haniyeh and hand him over. Well, then that's going to make diplomacy more complicated too. So all of that happened, and we're going to see it unfold over the coming days. I do think I've said a whole bunch of stuff that's bad about it and that makes the world a worse place. But puncturing the belief that the Israelis are completely outside of the law, puncturing the belief that they can do whatever they want and there won't be any legal consequences ever. Puncturing that has been, that's happened. It's just that is you cannot deny that that's a consequence of the International Criminal Court application for arrest warrants today. So that's a big deal. Whatever else, all the other stuff that's happened as a result of it, that is still a big deal. And I think it's going to have ripple effects until this whole situation is resolved. And that's going to be a long way away. So those ripple effects are going to go on for a long time. So let me tell you a few let's get back to the war, because that is ultimately, as I always say, where this is going to be decided, not even in the International Criminal Court. So apparently UNRWA estimates that 810,000 people have been displaced from Rafah during the Israeli attack, since the Israeli attack started 2 weeks ago. So again, human suffering beyond all ability to fathom it. Oh, sorry. I gotta say one more thing. I gotta quote writer Musa Asada on the decision of the International Criminal Court, because according to Musa Asada, he said the hallmark, he compares it to Vietnam and Algeria. He said the French were forced to acknowledge the equality of Algerians. In Vietnam, the American defeat meant acknowledging the equality of the occupier and invader with the Vietnamese people. Historically, the hallmark of the downfall and defeat of the white colonizer is the imposition of the hardest thing on the white man, equality, even if such equality is inherently unjust and inequitable. Today, May 2024, the Western world and its institutions have done the hardest thing for them. 3 Palestinian leaders are considered equals, albeit unfairly, with 3 European Zionist colonizers. Well, 2, I guess. Objectively, from our perspective as colonized peoples, our history and our experiences, this is a significant step and a historical defeat for the enemy, as well as a loss for the core of what we oppose on the planet, which is colonial white supremacy. and of course to emphasize the specks of dust under the soles of the shoes of Mohammed Daif, Yahya Sinwar, and Ismail Haniyeh are worth more than the entire West. So there. Okay, now back to the war. Um, so yeah, the humanitarian situation is unfathomable, as you've heard when from my discussion with Dr. Tarek Lubeni. But Gaza, there have been more videos coming out. North Gaza, Jabalia, sniper videos, more anti-tank weapons and attacks. We have, yeah, more intense airstrikes from Israel. 10 distinct massacres reported in the past 24 hours. But there was a some kind of camaraderie between Al-Qassam and Saraya al-Quds, the Hamas's armed wing, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, in a video where they were attacking two different Merkava tanks, and they were trying to take the explosive from each other and plant it themselves, and they were saying, come on, let me keep it. No, I want to go, I want to go. So they're fighting over it. It's like Gimli and Legolas and Lord of the Rings. They're fighting over who gets to take the action and who gets the glory on the battlefield. So there's also, yeah, constant mortar attacks, bombardments against the Israeli forces in Rafah. The Iraq resistance sent 2 drones to Eilat. And all over the West Bank. Tubas, Tulkarm. There has been fighting in Jenin. In Jenin, they rearrested another woman prisoner who was freed as part of the prisoner exchange. So non-agreement capable again. And the pier. Okay, so the pier. This is an interesting thing. The pier, they've apparently found photos and videos of the United States supplying Israelis with weapons. Remember, the Israelis are the ones who are receiving the materials from the pier. The pier gets ships from Cyprus. They land on the pier, and then they get trucked off the pier to be received by the Israeli army. So the Israelis are continuing to exert control on that corridor, and I guess the idea is that the pier will the hope is that the pier, because it's Americans, will not come under the same level of attack from the resistance, and meanwhile will then be able to supply the Israelis right in the field with whatever weapons they want to use right then and there. So the humanitarian uh, name and kind of label applied to this US pier will, they're hoping, prevent the resistance from attacking it the way they would have attacked the Israelis had they tried to establish their presence there. So if they can close all the crossings, I mean, there is apparently also humanitarian aid that's going there. So it becomes like a US Israeli control point. They can supply the Israeli army from there to continue not to maintain an occupation. The humanitarian label will hopefully shield them from coming under resistance attack, and that way they'll be able to establish some kind of more permanent occupation inside Gaza. I don't think that's going to work, but it is certainly something that they appear to be trying. So that seems to be the game. There's a lot of games afoot between the International Criminal Court and this pier, but today is their day. Today is their day to try their things, and so they're trying their pier and they're trying the ICC. I should also mention maybe I'll conclude with Hezbollah. We've got 13 distinct attacks from Hezbollah, guided missiles, artillery, rockets, east and west, all over. So, should I say anything about Tubas? There was a car bomb, a pre-prepared car bomb on one of the Israeli vehicles from point blank range. Several explosive devices on occupation vehicles in Thagra Street area, causing severe damage to one of the vehicles. So West Bank is also getting very fierce in terms of fighting, as well as, yeah, Tulkarm. So I think with that, I can stop. Please like, please subscribe, please comment, and hang in there. I will see you in the next one. There is going to be follow-up on both pier and, I'm sure, ICC business. I specifically said last time, I guess day 224, I think, that I wasn't going to report on legal events until things changed, and then things changed. So here we are. All right, I'm going to stop there, and I'll see you on the next one.